I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. I'm here today with Rinki Sethi, Vice President and CISO at BILL, a publicly traded leader in financial automation software for small and mid-sized businesses. Learn more at bill.com. Evolution Equity TV is brought to you by Evolution Equity Partners, an international venture capital investor partnering with exceptional entrepreneurs to develop market-leading cybersecurity and enterprise software companies. To learn more about Evolution Equity, visit evolutionequity.com. Rinki, welcome. Great to have you with us today.
It's great to be here.
We've known each other for a while. We follow you. You have a great background. You've had some really important roles in the cybersecurity industry, including CISO positions. Give our audience a 30,000-foot view on your background.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am currently the CISO at BILL. I lead the IT and the security organization here. I've been here 2.5 years. I have a 20-year cybersecurity career. I started at PG&E, went to Walmart, worked at eBay, Intuit, Palo Alto Networks, IBM, and then took my first CISO job at Rubrik and then Twitter before I came here at BILL. I sat on a couple boards. I sit on the board of Vaulttree, which is in the data encryption space, and sat on the board of ForgeRock before it was acquired by Thoma Bravo, and work with a lot of startups. Advising investing.
So Rinki, I hope you don't mind. I want to ask you to retell me a story you told me once before, because it's one of my favorites. It's funny. I feel like somehow, some way it ties into your cyber background. It goes way back. Can you tell us about you and your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. So I was really fortunate. I grew up with computers at a very early age. I used to build my own computers and that kind of thing. And when I was 14, I remember we started using AOL Instant Messenger, and we would chat with friends, and we had dial-up internet back then. And I overheard my dad saying something to my mom that I had chatted with a friend about. And there's no way he could have known unless he was reading my chats. And so I found out that he had parental spyware, also known as a keylogger, installed on my machine and probably my sister's machine as well. And he was spying on every single chat. And so I ended up writing a software because we had this cat and mouse game. I would uninstall it. He would install it. Sometimes I'd forget to check if it was on my machine. I wrote a program that would detect every time he installed that software and would remove it. And then I shared that with my sister as well. And then every now and then I'd also mess with him by saying things to my friends, like, so that he could read all this nonsense. So I feel like my hacker mindset was probably there, even though I had no idea what a hacker was back then.
See, I'm so glad that I asked you to retell the story, because your sister wasn't in it the first time. So you learn something new, every time you talk about these things. Now, does your dad still remember that?
Yes, absolutely.
So Rinki, you and other women in the field who we've followed were a great inspiration for a couple of my daughters. And there's a whole backstory on how we wound up writing a book and ultimately produced a documentary. But you were on a list of about 100 women in cybersecurity that we had shown to them, because the feeling was, hey, this is a field for men, the hacker in hoodie image, what have you. So we pulled up YouTube videos and we were looking at people. You were one of them. And I don't think you even knew that back at the time, where the book came from, but we appreciate it. I want to ask you where we are today. I don't know how accurate our market data is. We work hard at it, but these are very, very big numbers, so you can't lock just on an exact statistic. But we estimated about 10% of our workforce in cyber was made up of women a decade ago. And now we're projecting that number is going to hit about 30% next year. Are you seeing many more women in the field? Do you think that is a general idea of where we are?
I think that sounds right. I think it's around 20 to 30% sounds about right. Those are kind of the stats that I've read. I do see more younger women pursuing cyber careers. There's more in the pipeline. However, I think the one caveat to that is still when you get to management and senior management and CISO level, there's still really few. And so I haven't heard kind of the latest stat in management in cybersecurity, but I would say that's a lot lower. And it kind of shocks me every time somebody says, can you introduce me to some women CISOs? And I'm part of some really strong CISO networks with women or women focused, and still there's very few of us out there.
Well, you're very right about that. In fact, we did do a statistical analysis of the Fortune 500. So those are only 500 positions, but they are the largest companies in our country. And the number was about 14%. So as you say, substantially lower, unfortunately. What do you make of that?
I'm hoping that as we're getting kind of new blood and having more women enter the cybersecurity space, we're going to start to see those numbers grow. But I think retaining women, and I think it's more women in tech broadly, not just cybersecurity, that as women start having families, a lot of the burden does fall on women. And can they sustain having a career as well as being a parent? Or if they're taking care of older parents, who does that burden fall on? I think creating workplaces that are more inclusive and have that flexibility is going to be important so that we do have that diversity and talent in senior leadership.
So we need to do a lot. For us as a media property, the best that we could do is stand up role models. We work hard at it. You're certainly one of them. But what else can our industry do? The math doesn't really work. We have millions of open positions, no matter how many anybody says it is. There's a lot. There's a lot of positions we need to fill. Women make up half of the workforce, half of the population. But for 20% or 30%, it just doesn't make sense. So how do we attract more women to the field, including young girls?
Cybersecurity is just not brought to kids at an early age. And so they start using devices and technology before they ever learn about cybersecurity or privacy or any of that, right? Like kids have devices in their hands at maybe like 2 years old and they don't learn about these things. And so I have a personal story around this with my daughter who I think she was 7 or 8 and she got a text message from some gaming app that she was using to go buy more coins or something like that. And she responded back and said, let me wait till my dad wakes up from his nap and I'll ask him. And there was no sense of like, no, you don't respond. Luckily, that was an automated message, but like, who are you sharing that information with? And it was a real shock to me that I need to go teach my own daughter about cybersecurity. I remember almost a decade ago, we started a program while I was at Palo Alto Networks with the Girl Scouts to create the first set of cybersecurity curriculum from kindergarten to 12th grade that was then exposed to every zip code in the US. And there's girls now graduating from those programs and actually pursuing cyber careers. And I think we need to do more of that. We need to get cybersecurity awareness at the school level. Having kids in school, I see the content that's coming out, and I think there needs to be way more exposure to the kids themselves and more companies giving back and creating programs like this, not just within the US, but globally. And I think there's a massive opportunity, and it's not significant effort. And I think we have an obligation to give back so that we can see these roles filled, because this is going to be, cybersecurity is a challenge that there's going to be more roles and it's going to require diversity for us to tackle some of the toughest challenges we're going to see.
Well, maybe we're planting some seeds and it just takes time. That was an amazing program. Palo Alto Networks, the Girl Scouts of the USA, they shared our research. I remember when they originally launched the program, we had Sylvia Acevedo come on with us. She wrote the foreword to our book and she appeared in the documentary. She's fantastic. She's a rocket scientist. Last I heard, 300,000 Girl Scouts earned those badges. So I'm wondering, in that K through 12 age group, what are the ages? I don't know, but maybe we're going to start to see those girls show up in the pipeline and it's just a matter of time.
Yeah, in fact, I interviewed somebody that had gone through that curriculum and said, like, I actually earned a badge. And that's amazing, right? That to think that was just a decade ago and these kids are now graduating. And so the impact can be huge, but that alone is not enough. And so there need to be more programs and we need to get in front of kids and show them that the stereotype is not this boy with a hoodie on that's a hacker. And there's so many different roles and so many different kinds of people pursuing these careers.
So we're not going to give too much credit to your dad, even though I love the story. So you have to tell us, how did you get into cyber or technology early on?
Yeah, so I was exposed to computers, like I said, very early on, but how I got into cyber was actually by accident. I graduated during a downturn in the economy when the dot-com bust happened. So I went into computer science during the boom and then graduated during the bust. And there were no jobs. It was kind of like the pandemic years where it was really hard for college new grads to find jobs. And it was kind of like that. So nobody was getting a job. Everyone was pursuing master's degrees and things like that. And there were like hundreds of people fighting for one position that was open in a company. And one of my friends was being recruited by Pacific Gas and Electric. And she said, Rinki, even though you're not being recruited, they're going to have pizza. Just come with me and then we'll study after that. And so I went with her and I ended up talking to one of the hiring managers who asked me, what's your favorite class that you're taking right now? And I said, I'm taking this cryptography class by Matt Bishop, who wrote the first cryptography textbook for colleges. And I'm just like, I love that class. It's fascinating. And the hiring manager was like, wait, so not programming? And I said, no, I love programming, but this is really interesting and different. And he said, well, I'm a senior manager in our information protection department at PG&E, and I'd love to interview you for a role that we have open. And I ended up getting that role, and like the rest is history. I've been in cybersecurity ever since then.
Wow, that's an interesting story. But, I wonder what got you hooked. Was there anything that you were exposed to in middle school and high school where, you leaned toward technology, wanting to get into the field, or?
Always exposed, not just my dad, but by uncles. They were all like real techies and geeks. And that's like weekends and at home. That's what I would hear about. At school, I had less exposure because back then, like now, the same schools that I went to have Java and all these programming classes. They have computers very easily accessible, but that's not how it was. And so I remember being one of the only girls in an electronics class where we were building strobe lights and things like that. So I was kind of like already into tech because of the exposure at home. And that kind of grew and expanded where I was just very comfortable with computers. And if something would crash, I would become tech support for people around me. And I had access to that. And so that was kind of my passion in tech started like at a very early age because I was just exposed to it when other people didn't even have that kind of access.
So before we let you go, Rinki, I have to ask you about the threat landscape today. It's enormous. There's so many issues I'm sure that you grapple with. Not necessarily at your company, but just generally, and you talk to your colleagues. What are the biggest issues, biggest fears? Is it ransomware? Is it Gen AI weaponizing cyber criminals? There's just so much out there. What do you wake up and think about and worry about every day?
I do think about some of the things you just mentioned. And of course, we're all solving for that kind of basic set of threats that exist, ransomware, identity, some of the fundamental things that we've been talking about for decades and decades still are kind of the basic, you hear CISOs still saying that's still a problem for me, and I'm focused on that. But I think what really worries me is like we have so much technology and innovation at our hands today. And it's actually a really exciting time for cybersecurity as we're reading new companies coming on getting funding and things like that. But what worries me is you deploy all of this, and then it's like this one thing that you didn't know about that didn't have coverage, that missed your scanners or missed your, is not covered by your protections that you have in place, that creates a hole and a vulnerability. And I keep thinking about that. And are we in a position in any of the companies I've been at that if you're breached, are you going to be able to respond and really contain that quickly? And so it's that kind of thing. I think that really is like we've been talking about it for years, that companies have to focus on their response strategy and like crisis management. And so I think that's kind of what keeps me up at night, if anything, that do we have coverage on everything? And if those areas that aren't covered, if that was to lead to some kind of gap, that are we going to be able to handle that as, seamlessly as possible?
Well, Rinki, as always, really appreciate you coming on with us and the insights and the sense of humor. Thank you for everything, and we hope you can come back on with us later in this year.
Yeah, I look forward to that. Thanks for having me.
I'm Steve Morgan, founder of Cybersecurity Ventures and editor-in-chief at Cybercrime magazine. Evolution Equity TV is brought to you by Evolution Equity Partners, an international venture capital partnering with exceptional entrepreneurs to develop market-leading cybersecurity and enterprise software companies. To learn more about Evolution Equity Partners, visit evolutionequity.com. You can keep up with all of our media at cybercrimemagazine.com.